Welcome everybody. Today I will talk about attacking the Internet of Things. Thank you all for joining me. First off, a few words about myself. My name is Ferdinand Nölscher. I'm a hardware security guy. I currently work at CarIT in Ulm. And there I happily reverse engineer things and build tools. For example, I've been in Vegas this year at Blackhat and Defcon presenting a tool that we made for car hacking at CarIT. And needless to say, I like cars, but also lasers. That's me with the laser right there. Barbecues, currywurst, Berlin, right? All right, enough about me. First, I tried to come up with a good example to show why we need IoT security so badly. And I found this. It says, wearable devices could become a black box for the human body. And they've been using it in courtrooms as supportive evidence for cases. My first thought was, how can they use that data? How can they trust that data from those devices? Of course, it's cool that they're investigating new methods to enhance the legal process, but this is why we need security. Also, stuff like this gives me a very bad feeling. Of course, it's good. Like in the past few years, we had more researchers pouring in, looking at IoT devices. And it's good because once the results are published, people can do something about it. You know, the OEMs might patch the flaws, or people might not buy devices that are proven to be insecure. But that's not all of it. Every few days, there's a new pack of vulnerabilities released, and this is all low-skilled attackers need to leverage those devices to their profit. Criminals also start using the IoT. For example, this was a botnet that was discovered covering 1 million devices. Yeah, the criminals were using it for running denial-of-service attacks, but also the privacy implications are very big. Nobody likes creeps from the internet watching your video feed from your home camera, right? So I'm not saying that IoT security in general is horrible. I know that a lot of IoT guys, they design things with security in mind and they try to make things better. But still, there's a lot of challenges in IoT security. Now, why is that? In general, like in software security, it's a trade-off between cost and time because people, they like features, right? Like security, yuck, it's ease up your budget, needs a lot of brain juice and capable people, and sometimes you just don't have it. You want to bring your device to the market really quick, so just no time for that. But there's more to that. Even if you take care about security, like from the beginning, and you know, there's still the hardware, because IoT, the things, they integrate physically into our lives. So they come with hardware, with sensors, all sorts of stuff. And once the device is out on the market, once the PCBs are made and the devices are sold to actual people, you cannot make any changes, right? So if you find a blunder security-wise, you're just going to have to deal with it. It's not like in software where you can roll out an update and everything is good. Also, doing 40,096-bit RSA on an 8-bit processor powered by a LiPo. It's just not possible. Mainly because it takes current. The microcontrollers might be slow, you know, and some microcontrollers don't even offer security features. I'm talking about the ESP8266 here. If you're using that, you should make sure you're doing it right. And it's a very recent addition to the market, actually. It's not like all these MCUs I'm talking about are very old, but still OEMs claim that their devices are super secure, but actually they're not, or they're somewhat secure. But in security, the attacker will always go for the weakest link in the chain. And there it really makes a difference if your chip is somewhat secure or super secure. Also, supply chain attacks, I don't like to call them that way, but just for an example, you're an IoT developer and you buy some fancy module, for example, for a Wi-Fi or a Zigbee. Now, in that use case, you trust your supplier to deliver up to specs. But sometimes they chose, like, I've seen that, for example, that microcontrollers are exchanged for cheaper ones that are knockoffs from original ones, and they don't provide the same security set. And they might not be as testable as the original ones. So, to show you the main attacker's point of view, you need to understand what devices the attackers will go for ultimately. So this graphic, I've taken it from a scientific paper. On the bottom left here, you can see the stakeholders deploying the IoT in those areas that have bubbles with colors here. Now, let me just say, if you're developing Wi-Fi connected toilet paper, your chances of being hacked are low, because your attackers are, it's toilet paper after all, or a fridge, So this will not be unlikely to attract a lot of high-skilled attackers, but still, once the vulnerabilities are out there, low-skilled attackers can pour in and abuse devices. But really, those areas are crucial. If there's no security, there will be no IoT in these areas. Specifically talking about defense here, but factory as well. And some attackers, they go for the money, for information, for company secrets. And they might gain entry to corporate networks through IoT devices. As I said, attacking the weakest link in the chain. If you're a locked-down company network, all the servers are patched, and then you start adding those fancy light switches or whatever you use. People might actually go for these ones instead, because it's way easier to attack those devices. And there's so many of them, so keep that in mind. Now, you can divide attackers by the level of skill. I'm starting with the lowest skill here. It's the script kiddie. They mostly hack stuff for the fun. They're very curious. They probably just got into hacking. They want to be cool. Their skill is very low. They don't invent things themselves. They take it from the internet or from others, and they reuse stuff. So those guys are not really doing research. More skilled is the student. They do it for the fun as well. I mean, it's always sort of fun, but especially criminal-wise, they do criminal things because they have political objectives or just because they're curious, they want to learn. They have more knowledge, they have technical knowledge, probably are studying computer science or something like that. And they really like IoT devices. In DEFCON, for example, they had the IoT village where they had lots of random devices from random manufacturers. You could just go there and take it, tear it apart, dump the firmware, whatever. It was a lot of fun, and a lot of vulnerabilities being found. Now, the professional, basically, is another skill level above the student, but they basically have to feed a family. They don't do it for the fun or for gaining fame. They have some source of money, and they have to give information to them or disrupt some service, gain information in general. Now, last but not least, I have to mention the state-sponsored. Nobody really knows what they're up to, but yeah, we're often defending against the first three kinds of attackers, but at CarIT we still strive to make it very hard for them, especially when talking about defense or infrastructure, IoT things. Sometimes you take this into consideration as well. To get a little bit into hardware hacking, I want to explain you why we do it, why we have to do it actually. And that's because IoT, as I already mentioned, has also parts of hardware. And while the software side is still very important, on the hardware side we didn't have that much of a history in information security. So there's been smart cards, There have been gaming consoles which have been broken to run pirated games, but there's not so much about like hardware hacking in general. Maybe chip tuning as well, but that's it. And because it's sort of new and upcoming field, you can provide people with more attacks. For example, I will take some device of IoT company and I will use the information that I gain from attacking this device from looking at the hardware to attack the backends of the company. Now the good thing about hardware hacking is also that if you own the device physically, if you can hold it in your hand, the data is somewhere. Eventually all the data that is stored on the device will fall into the hands of an attacker. It's only a matter of time and motivation, of course, to get them. That's pretty cool. That's also very important for the free software movement, for DRM, that sort of stuff. It provides a lot of potential in general. Recently, we've been having a lot of research in side channel analysis. We've done some research ourselves in these topics. And I think there's still a lot of stuff to be discovered. Last but not least, it's fun. Now, things can get really hard in hardware very quick, and that's mainly because of the lack of people, tools, and time. Time is the most valuable factor here because you get a device and you have no idea what it does. Like the first step is to figure out how to power it up. Now, if you get a big ECU from a car, and you first have to like try to poke the wires, see where power is routed, and maybe it's waiting for some CAN messages from the bus to actually power up, so that even powering things up can take time. And because you never get to know, at least almost never get to know things completely, your chance of breaking them is quite high. That happens. Also, OEMs tend to have multiple lines of products, which each have their own debuggers, their paraphernalia, evaluation boards. That's very expensive, right? So if you get a new product, you're likely to buy a whole set of new debuggers every time. So this especially is what keeps people from getting professional into hardware hacking. And also it's very bad because you lose money. Yeah. Last but not least, legal actions. Still, OEMs are not that comfortable with vulnerability disclosure in the hardware sector. We've seen that in the 90s from the software industry. But to give you an example, there were some years ago some Dutch researchers, and they did a research on key fob encryption for cars from a big car manufacturer. And they wanted to basically tell people, or like tell people how to attack the encryption, how to open up another one's car without owning it, right? And it was pretty interesting, but of course, they got sued, and they weren't able to talk about their research for months, or I think even years, so that doesn't make security better at all. Now, I've prepared a little demo for you guys, so I can tell a story, and then in the end, answer some questions that might arise for security, some examples on how to do things, and on how to do things better. So, this little thing here is a plug-and-play Wi-Fi camera. It's not running, unfortunately, but we will get to that point. Plug-and-play, meaning that you can just attach power and attach it to your network using Ethernet or Wi-Fi, and then you can access your video feed from the camera anywhere in the world. It has a microphone, night vision, you can see the LEDs here, motion detection, a relay for triggering alarms and stuff, like pretty common. You can buy those for 50 bucks anywhere. So what do we do as an attacker? Of course, we first take the device, look what's inside. So this is just what I did. You can see the LEDs are plugged on their own module, and that green PCB there provides some chips here. This is where the screws were. Yeah. But most important for you here is this little URL. I don't know if you can read it, but it's an HTTP blah 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 blah.com URL, and it says DDNS. Now DDNS is for dynamic DNS, so this is how they do plug and play. But yeah, I mean in the manual it says that you just plug in the camera and visit this URL, and you will get to your camera from anywhere in the world. So how does the server know where the camera is? But let's first look at the hardware. tearing it further apart. There's nothing really new here. I mean, I've highlighted the chip right there. We will see the data sheet for that in a few seconds. Lots of stuff in general, but we mostly care about the active components in hardware hacking. Like you can see a lot of resistors and capacitors. They're all important for filtering and powering up stuff, but you know, the things that execute logic or store logic like memories are the most important to us. So we look on the back side and we can see a black module that is plugged on the green PCB. Now this seems to be a RAM, you know, it has lots of pins, has a sticker on it, and this seems to be the main processor. That makes sense because Ralink also makes a lot of networking equipment. So probably the manufacturer of the camera just bought this black module from the market and then designed the camera around it. Continuing, if we unplug that, we can see there's another IC on the back. And from experience, I can tell that's most likely to be the memory the chip will boot from, because these microprocessors, they usually don't have internal memory that's big enough to hold all the firmware. I've highlighted all the interesting stuff. I forgot to mention that these pins were not routed to the main board, to the green board. They were just on the black board. And 2 pins not routed anywhere, that's suspicious, I would say. So if we read the chip numbers from the chips and then Google for them, if we are lucky, we will find the documentation for the chips. You know, we want to see how they work. And this will confirm our assumption that the Ralink is the main processor. It's really capable. It has 360 megahertz, MIPS architecture, might be even running some Linux, not just firmware. On the right, we can see they were using a crypto IC. I don't know why they did it. They must have something to hide, but we'll explore further. Now, what did we learn? Again, for the plug-and-play functionality, dynamic DNS is used. In general, we found 2 flash ICs on the device, one on the main module and one on the green one, on the green PCB. And the camera is actually a daughter board for the black module. Now with the multimeter, I first confirmed that while looking at the unconnected pins, I found that the logic level is high while the device is powered on. Now, UART is a serial protocol. People tend to like it. They really like to use it for debugging because you can spawn a shell from Linux on your UART, then log in. It's good for debugging in general. But it could have been any protocol like JDEC, something else. And because it's resting in a high state, I know that it's very suspicious and it could be UART actually. Also, with the continuity mode of the multimeter, we can prove that the crypto chip is connected to the main module over I2C. So let's continue and evaluate what options do we have now as an attacker. I will just go through each of these options and show you how to do it. An actual attacker might not do all of them, but a professional attacker would do all of this at the same time, sort of. So the first thing is we want to gain the memory. We just not, you know, I could smash it on the ground and say I've hacked it, but we actually want to find flaws in the software, in the firmware. So the chip, that's the memory chip, it really doesn't care who's reading it. You know, we can just take it from the board and plug it into our own programmer, read out the data. That's just what I did. Here you can see the heat gun. You have to be very careful not to destroy the PCB. And then, using a multi-programmer, or whatever do you call it, you can just plug it there on a socket and read it out. Now, after getting the firmware from the chip, it turns out that they're using U-boot. That's a very common format for storing firmware in general. 2.6 kernel, BusyBox. And it's very similar on every other cameras. That's not the only one I've seen. Like routers, cameras, they're all using that sort of setup. Modified in some way, but it ends up being 2.6 with BusyBox, Linux. rootfs, just another file system. We can mount it and inspect the data on it. Turns out the root password is actually 123456. And the main binary seems encrypted. So now we know why they're using a crypto chip. Continuing, let's use the logic analyzer to really confirm that there's a UART port on the hardware or any other protocol. In hardware security, it's always about proving assumptions. And this is why we need the logic analyzer. It will look something like this. Here you can see the probes. The logic analyzer will just measure the voltage on the lines very quickly and then reconstruct the signals going through the lines. So needless to say, using a crypto IC doesn't really make sense if your attacker has a logic analyzer. Because the way the IC works is you ask it, here's some encrypted data, please encrypt it for me. And it will say, okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, 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 in plain text. So yeah, with the logic analyzer, we can decode the protocol. It's actually confirming that this is a serial output. Nothing very fancy. It just spits out the boot log and then leaves you with a prompt where you can log in. Well, okay. So that's what we did, actually. Because we now know the password for the root user, we could connect using a simple serial converter to USB. That's actually just an Arduino, but anything works, really. And because we had the firmware already, we were able to log in with the root user. And last but not least, more black box-ish, but keep in mind, we want to know how does the server know where to point the DNS name for this camera so people can log in over the internet, right? So let's just inspect the traffic. And if we are lucky, they didn't encrypt anything. So what I did is I have my router right here. It's actually the same one. The camera is plugged in like a regular device, and the WAN port, the internet port, goes to my laptop. So everything that goes through the router will first go through a proxy on my laptop, then to the internet. And this way, we end up seeing all the requests that are made to their backend. These are all the requests, quite a lot of stuff going on, actually. And in the bottom here, you can see the final request. This is the URL that's printed on the case. And neither the username nor the password are looking very random. And I confirmed with a second camera that the password actually is always the same. Now on the top you can see what an attacker doing the man in the middle would see. And on the bottom you can see the output if we search the file system for that using the UART shell. In this case we got both, but that's our finding. The password is static and it's very stupid, 560. Seriously, guys? So I was curious how many devices are actually on the network, how much did they sell, basically. So I created a list counting up from H, digit, all the way, 000 to 99 something, blah, blah. And brute forcing the DNS name, turns out they actually sold a lot of those devices. Almost the whole space is mapped. And it's like unique IPs here. No duplicates, nothing. So the dynamic DNS setup works like this. The camera will boot up, see if it has a connection to the internet. If it does, it will say hi to the server, and the server will check the password and ID. If the password is 560, then the server will take the originating IP and use this IP address for pointing the domain name to it. So after some time, the user will type in the URL that's printed on the case. It will be redirected to the IP the server just got. Everything is fine. We can abuse that. We can take over other people's cameras. So the first two steps are actually the same. But in that case, the attacker will note the actual IP of the victim camera and write it down, memorize it. Then the same request will be sent, but with the username and URL of the victim. Because the credentials are static, the server will take this IP address and say, okay, I'll point the domain to the attacker server. And then the victim will be led to the attacker server and log into a fake login panel. After that, the attackers could log into the original IP because they're creepy dudes, whatever. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate to you now. Luckily, I do have internet here, and I just booted up the camera before the talk. So here I'm logged in. Oh, actually, let me start with that. So assuming I'm the attacker, let's go to the camera's URL. And blah, 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 blah. Let's first look for the IP address. It's actually routed to 87 something, which is the hotel's IP address. Now, I will use my server to send the same request, telling the company server to point the domain name to my attacker server. It says, okay, done. Now, if I go to the URL that's printed on the case, unlucky here. Okay, let's use Chrome because I used that to log in before. h9477.ipcam.com. And if the demo gods are graceless, okay, here it will ask me for a password, and I'm like, okay, I'm logging in to my regular camera, right? So I enter my password. It's super secure. And oh, it's telling me it's performing a firmware upgrade. I have to wait. But actually, because it's my server, I will, as an attacker, now go to that URL and look at secrets.txt. And there, it will tell me the credentials and the domain of users trying to log in. So if I was really, really, really malicious, I could make all the domain names that are printed on the cases on any camera point to my server and have people log in and then do whatever I want with their cameras. For example, flashing a new firmware. Let's actually do that. Yeah. So here, yeah, it doesn't really make sense, but once you're logged in, you can just upgrade the device firmware and gain persistence. So, continuing. What did we learn here? The UART shell is a vector. Now, it doesn't matter if it's UART, JTAG, any protocol that you use to write on the device. If it was just reading, we would be fine, actually. But because it will spawn a shell on the UART port, we can just log in with the credentials, which are also very weak and stupid. Actually, a script kiddie would have been able to do that, just trying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know. And this was like the first breakthrough for us. Using a strong password is always good in that case. And also, I like the idea of making things read-only. So probably they were using that for debugging and developing, which is totally fine. But once you roll that out, you have to disable it, make it output only. It's okay. You can still do some forensics on it, but that should be like the thought behind that. Now, the firmware is stored unencrypted on external memory. It could be hardened by using encrypted storage. Now, many new processors do have support for that, or if it's not encrypted, they at least provide some trusted boot sort of stuff where you can write a key to the processor, and all firmware images have to be validated. They have to be signed by that key. So this way, attackers could not take out the memory and write their own stuff in. So for example, if the UART shell was closed, in this case, I would still be able to take the memory and write a binary or modify a script in such a way that it would spawn a shell on the network, so I could log in remotely. So the authenticity is not checked at all on this device. Static credentials are bad. Fixing that flaw would be straight away, you would just use a random password, a strong password for each device that is unique per device. Also, this is a nice example because the guys just threw crypto at the problem. They mainly did it because they want to prevent other companies from copying their design with the firmware. But anyone with a logic analyzer can go around that. That's the advantage you have as a hardware attacker. If you own the device physically, you always get to a way of reading the data that is stored there, even if it's encrypted. If it's decrypted on the device, at some point you will get it. This could be hardened in such a way that a lot of attackers would be fended off by just performing the crypto operations on the main microcontroller It's powerful enough, 360 megahertz, come on guys. Also predictable DDNS names. That's actually something almost everyone used to do wrong when they started doing like network storage, cameras. Everything was predictable. Some of them are now using random URLs, which is the way to go. Like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 characters. Or provide some other way. Provide a gateway that will redirect the user to the actual device. So they won't have to remember like A, 9, Z, B, something that's very hard. But you can have a trusted component that will redirect the users to the device. In general, design products this way, and keep in mind that the attacker will eventually gain all the data physically. I wouldn't store company secrets on a device that I give to the customer, period. Compromise is a matter of when, and thus you should assume that some part of your company, your whole company, or like products you give to the customer are already compromised. All user input should be considered tainted, and all the devices you give out to customers/attackers are tainted as well. So check your inputs. Some do's for IoT security in general. Do use hardware security features. Many microcontrollers provide you with features like, it's basically a checkbox saying that you will, after flashing the firmware, it will disable all the debugging ports. Try to minimize your attack surface as far as you can go. Hardware-wise or software-wise, this applies in all directions. Work with security guys. I'm not only saying that because I want your money, but actually you will get a lot of help, and security guys are fun. Implement some detection, tamper evidence, seals, just physical seals. For example, if your device gets put in the public at some place, having tamper evidence would be good, or some, for example, microcontrollers provide features that allow you to apply break-off resistors that break off when you open up the case, and they will store a timestamp in a special part of memory, thus allowing you to send a request to the backend saying, hey guys, I've been tampered with, what should I do? Clean up your firmware. Clean up any credentials you use for debugging, for convenience. Make your firmware slim. This way you could maybe also use like smaller flash ICs, which could save cost. But mainly it's because I always see a lot of debugging strings and testing scripts and test accounts just left on production firmware. And that gives up a time advantage to any attacker. I like the concept of data diodes, like for example the UART port. If you would make that read-only, it wouldn't actually make a big deal for the attacker, because you can write to the device. Try to write on any peripheral as less as possible. Also support and use open audited libraries. NACL is a good example. I've seen it used in embedded as well. It's pretty good, pretty solid. Mbed is also doing great stuff. They have open source libraries, free libraries. They've been audited. They have a bug bounty program. These are good examples. And they support a lot of platforms to run on. All right. Don't implement backdoors. Debugging interfaces in general are backdoors. Don't leave them there in production hardware. Don't use hard-coded credentials. I don't need to say anything to that. Don't reinvent the wheel. Every time you invent your own protocol, cryptography, algorithm, make sure you do it right. Don't just throw cryptography at it, and don't just buy that appliance, even if the sales girl is very nice to you. How we can help you as a company, as Code White, we, like the red team-based approach to security, we will evaluate your company, your whole company, or your whole products continuously if you want that. The most benefit you will get as an IoT vendor is that we can provide full stack penetration testing. We have top-notch experts. They have a lot of experience. So this way we can, for example, start by taking your hardware and try to make our way to the backend, to your company network, to your domain controllers. But it also applies the other way around. If you try to do some damage, if you assume that one of your servers has been compromised, we could see how secure your hardware actually is. We have good coffee, and we don't bite. So I thank you all for coming. Thank you for your attention. I am Ferdinand Nölscher, and have a good day.